All you homeowners have unique needs. Some feel the need to leave up holiday decorations year-round. Others have the need to use their garage as practice space for their new metal band. And because each homeowner has unique needs, Geico helps you get the right coverage for your home and what's in it. That way, you get exactly what's right for you, even if your needs are unique. Get more with Geico.
Welcome to episode 100 of Wheelbearings. It's amazing that we've gotten this far. I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samid.
And I'm Rebecca Lindland.
And as last week, Rebecca is still in India, and because of time zone constraints, to make things easier on Dan, we're going to do the same kind of format we did last week, where we'll spend some time right now talking with Rebecca and I talking, and then later on we'll bring in Dan. And Rebecca can get on with her day and, get into the last few days of her vacation.
Yes, there's actually a 10.5-hour time difference between where I am. I'm in Calcutta now. Last time I was in Jalsama. And the 10.5 hours, I'm not going to lie, that half hour throws me every time.
It's kind of like being in Newfoundland.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know, I grew up in Canada, and Newfoundland has its own time zone, which is, even though Newfoundland is, at the far eastern end of Canada on the Atlantic coast, its time zone is actually 30 minutes past Eastern Standard Time, which is like 2 time zones over, which is crazy.
Yes.
I remember when I was growing up as a kid watching TV, on Canadian TV stations, when they give the promo for upcoming show, coming up at 9 o'clock Eastern and 9:30 Newfoundland. Wait a minute, they're like 1,000 miles east of here. Anyway.
That's crazy. Yeah. Yes.
All right. So, why don't we start with you? You were just telling me a little bit about the automotive situation in India.
Yeah, it's been really fascinating here. I've gone from the West Coast in Mumbai. I traveled to the northern parts of India, went to Jodhpur, like where the riding pants, and then through to Calcutta now. And each city has had a really different flavor, but the consistency in transportation is that Uber is incredibly popular here. There's still plenty of traditional taxis. There is some private ownership. I should clarify from last week. It is, it's. I still don't think it's prevalent, but I've been told by people that live here that it is. I'm like, okay, I believe you. But
it probably depends on which social group you're talking about.
It does. It very much does. I'm actually staying at a friend's club, which is kind of like a country club. I'm at Talegunge, it's called, and it's the oldest golf course in India. That was built on the outskirts of Calcutta, but now, of course, is right in the heart of the city. And certainly members that are chauffeured here tend to have luxury vehicles, privately owned luxury vehicles. But overall, there's very little public transportation. There are trams here, but they run irregularly. I took the metro yesterday, which was cool. It was around lunchtime, so it wasn't particularly crowded. There is in the middle of each car is the women's section, which is actually really nice because then only women are surrounded by, you're only surrounded by women. And so that was nice. But the metro only runs north and south in the city. So as long as you're going north or south, which we were doing, you're good. Otherwise, you're out of luck. And there's buses. So there's plenty of buses. The buses, though, do not come to a complete stop. So it's a running ingress and a running egress. So my friend who lives here,
that could be interesting,
right? And I've seen it, and I've seen it happen. And so my friend who lives here, her older mother, she doesn't ride the bus anymore because she can't get on and off fast enough. So that was fascinating. But the other thing I've noticed is the electric.
Do they at least slow down a little?
They slow down.
Okay.
But it's a crawl. The wheels don't stop.
Right.
So they're continuing to move, even as you are trying to get on and off. So it's mostly men that are on it, which again is just a fascinating part of life here. The other thing I noticed is that I was thinking about electric vehicles here because pollution, obviously air quality, is very poor on many, many days, and they still burn garbage, for instance. Calcutta has actually instituted things. There's no plastic bags that are allowed in Calcutta. There's a lot of reuse. There's a lot of biodegradable use of like you get your tea, the chai in handmade pottery. It almost looks like something you'd plant like your herbs in. And then 5 million of those are made every night because you drink your tea and then you break this little clay pot and it gets recycled and remade, and it's fascinating. Yes.
So is this a clay pot that's been fired already?
Yes. Yep. It's a handmade fired clay pot. I'll send you a picture, and they're like the size of your palm, so it's small, and that's what you get your tea in, and then those are immediately thrown out because you can't really clean them, you can't sanitize them properly, so they're single use, it's single use clay cup, and then you throw them in the bin and they get crushed and recycled and remade. And 5 million of these are made.
Fascinating.
Isn't that crazy? When she first told me,
is that just in Calcutta or is that nationally?
I don't think it's nationally.
Actually, that's probably Calcutta. I mean, India has a population of 1.3 billion people, so
yes,
that would make sense. Just for Calcutta.
Just for Calcutta. It is absolutely, absolutely amazing. There's about 3,000 people that make these, and their work hour is 7 p.m. to basically 7 a.m., and then they're delivered to each of the shops. They use a lot of banana leaf plates. We used a banana leaf plate yesterday at a restaurant and a banana leaf bowl, and again, those are completely biodegradable. So the city is making very conscious efforts to recycle, reuse. It's absolutely fascinating. Even in my hotel room, I have 3 different bins, one for dry waste, one for wet waste, and then one for like kind of medical waste. And so like Band-Aids and things like that. So it's been just really, Calcutta, I think, is probably the one city that has a very different reputation outside than inside the city. Yes.
You mentioned EVs.
Yes.
What's the electrical supply like? Is it consistent?
Gosh.
Is it reliable?
So I have made an effort to take pictures of some of the electrical systems in and around the city.
That good, huh?
And it looks like a tangle of hair that I've never seen before. It's incredible. And of course, a lot of it is pilfered. You borrow from your neighbor, you plug into here, you tap into there. It's surprisingly fairly reliable. I'm trying to think. I think it was in Jodhpur that we had a little bit of an inconsistency in our hotel, even though we stayed in a nice, it wasn't 5-star, but it was a little inconsistent there in terms of supply. But otherwise, it's been pretty good. Wi-Fi is also pretty good. Of course, I'm coming to you via Skype and Audacity, so it's pretty good, pretty consistent from that standpoint. But the idea that we're going to try and put significant electric vehicles on the road is just, I think that there's a lot of barriers to that. When you think in the U.S., the electrical grid is questionable for the power loads. I mean, we're I think India is so far from that. There's also continues to be a tremendous amount of bicycles, of motorbikes that are used. And, the family of 3, 4, 5 will be on a single bike. 3 guys will be on a motorbike going to work or transporting. And so, there continues to be a lot of doubling up. I mean, ride sharing is alive and well here. The little autos, which are the 3-wheeled kind of motorized tuk-tuk cars. Those, one person will get in, and then you wait until 3 or 4 more people show up, which takes about a minute to 2 minutes. And then they show up and then you're all kind of going in the same direction. And so ride sharing here is very much alive and well, and it's organic. It's not done via an app or anything. It's just as people are walking on the street, I don't know if you really ask or you just kind of say, which direction are you heading? There's actually tuk-tuks that are going north and south, and east and west, I believe, as well. So, there's kind of designated directions based on the side of the street you're parked on. And so you take it as far as you need to go. But it's all very organic. So there's things that, like you can't imagine that in Manhattan. Every once in a while, maybe you share a cab with somebody that you already know. But, the idea that you're just going to hop in a vehicle and go as far as you need to is still very foreign to us.
Yeah, it's funny, given that, at the same time in a place like Manhattan, people are more than willing to cram into a subway with strangers, but, they won't share a ride. Do you ever use, Uber Pool or Lyft Line? Have you ever tried to use that in Manhattan? Do you know if there's much use of that in a place like Manhattan?
I actually tried to use it in San Francisco, and it failed miserably. And I ended up waiting almost 10 minutes, and I was in a well-populated area, and I just said, forget it, and I just got my own Uber. So they do have it here as well, but pretty consistently when I've looked to see the time differences, it's about a 20 to 30 minute time difference or for arrival time if you try and go with other people with Uber Pool. So I just don't think it's efficient yet. And, that's one of the things that when we think about future mobility, we have to make sure that we're not just giving something a new name. So, ride sharing is carpooling. It's carpooling. And I think we talked about this before.
Right.
We can't call it something else and expect people to respond differently unless we have some other significant change.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I can't remember if it was Lyft or Uber, but one or perhaps both of them I know were trying in San Francisco, for example, was if you're willing to walk a block or two, to catch a ride,
right,
you can actually get a cheaper fare,
right,
and but in that way, you make the overall ride shorter, because the driver doesn't have to go up and down all kinds of different blocks, to pick you up at a specific location. If you can go closer to the kind of the main route that the driver is taking to catch the ride, then it works out better for everybody. And I think everybody's experimenting with different models to try to figure out what's going to work. And I don't think there's one single solution that's going to work ultimately for urban mobility. I think it's going to be this hodgepodge of a whole bunch of different things, and you're gonna have apps that give you the options and say, you put in where you want to go, and it'll give you a menu of, okay, it's gonna, if you want to get there in 15 minutes, you got this one at this price. If you want to get there in 20 minutes, you get this at this price, and so on. And I think that's kind of probably ultimately the way it's gonna end up.
Yes, and also I think about sort of this on-demand world that we're in. We pay for that convenience of having your car sitting there, and I think that we when we look at these different types of mobility, we have to factor in human behavior. Are people willing to walk that extra block? We saw with Ford's Chariot experiment that it was a glorified bus, and people didn't necessarily want to be what their perception of being inconvenienced, and so now Chariot is defunct, and so I think we have to be cognizant of this type of of change of behavior. How much does a a solution, if you will, or an opportunity, how much change in behavior does it require? With Uber and Lyft, and by the way, Lyft is not in India at all, but so with Uber, it doesn't really require you're using your phone, which people want to do, and the car comes to you, you get in, and you don't have to pay cash. So it's actually more convenient. It's more secure. You have this feeling of security because people know where you are. You can share your ride with, and let people know, hey, I'm in this car. So there's multiple layers of security and convenience with minimal change in behavior. And those kinds of solutions, I think, can be quite successful. It's a little bit of an on-demand. You do sometimes have to wait, but the other factors that go into using Uber outweigh that little bit of inconvenience.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve over the next 10, 15, 20 years. I think there's going to be a lot of failed experiments, and there will probably be some things that work out. So far the one consistent thing among all these different services is that nobody's yet figured out how to actually make a profit on it.
Yes.
which
Details.
Until they figure that one out, eventually VCs are going to want to stop setting fire to mountains of money to fund these things.
Yes.
And then they're going to have to figure out how to be self-sustaining. But in the meantime, we'll see a bunch of different tries, and hopefully some of them will work out.
Right. Well, that's one of the issues here in India is that when they first came in, Uber paid very, very well. And then they started cutting that, as they've done in other places, to your point, to try and figure out how to make a profit from this. So there's some drivers, I think, that have that have canceled or aren't participating anymore, or they just have to drive so much more in order to get the same pay, so the same amount of salary. So it's been transitional here as well, and they've had some growing pains also here. But yeah, so that how do you make a profit is still a question that remains.
Yeah, well, until that time, and until I can get reliable service from any of these operations where I live, which is not really something that happens right now. The few times when I've tried to use Lyft or Uber from my home, which is in a residential area, not really a suburb, but kind of on the edge of town, it's been problematic at best to actually get a ride from my location. So until then, I'm going to keep driving cars like the Genesis G70.
Yes, tell us.
Yeah. So I had the G70 over the past week, and overall I really liked it.
Yeah.
I had the 2-liter turbo rear wheel drive version, automatic transmission. It's based on the same platform as the Kia Stinger,
right,
but it's a little bit shorter wheelbase, which also means it's a tighter back seat. It's more, it's closer to BMW 3 Series size. It's overall, I think it's a great platform. The handling and the ride balance is really good. The 2-liter turbo engine makes plenty of power, plenty of torque.
Mm-hmm.
the one thing I noticed, have you driven the G70?
I have. I drove it in Korea a year and a half ago, so it wasn't the U.S. spec version of it. I haven't driven the U.S. spec version yet.
Okay. Well, when I was driving it, what I noticed sometimes, under moderate to hard acceleration, the transmission seemed to have really hard, abrupt shifts, and not in the way where with a high performance car with an automatic transmission where it's shifting fast, and it's not that kind of abruptness, but more like there was something weird going on. It felt kind of jerky. There was like some let up, and then all of a sudden, it would catch and go. And I'm not sure, if it had something to do with the particularly cold weather that we had when I was driving it.
Sure.
I doubt it. But, it seemed to have some strange behavior from the transmission sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes. And particularly, if I was coming through a corner, and then after, getting past the apex, accelerating out of the corner, then I'd sometimes get a weird shift, right there, get a downshift or even an upshift sometimes. And it was kind of bizarre. And
so some of the calibration, is the calibration off a little?
It could be, or it might have been just an issue with this particular car. Maybe there was a transmission issue with this particular car, because I don't remember, none of the other people I've talked to have driven the G70 have ever mentioned this. And certainly the Stinger that I drove, which has the same transmission in there, did not exhibit this kind of behavior.
Right.
But aside from that, everything else about it was really nice. I mean, the interior was really beautifully turned out. Not quite to the level of the Kia 900 I was driving the week before, but that's also significantly more. That's a further up the food chain, more expensive car. But the G70, I think had a really nice balance overall of performance and the level of luxury that was in there. One thing that I did note, in terms of the interior, and a lot of cars that are kind of in this class now, they tend to have, for the infotainment system, they'll have like a central control knob, like an iDrive type controller. And the G70 does not have that. I think the G80 does, but the G70 does not. It has, it's using the more basic Hyundai infotainment system, which that system in and of itself, I don't have any issues with. The interface, is clean and easy to use, and it's responsive. But it's touchscreen only. But it does have rotary volume knobs and tuning knobs, so that's a good thing. And the other controls, the climate controls and everything, are physical controls, so that's always a good thing. But overall, I really liked it. And at I think it was $45,000 was the one I had. Let me see,
so the one that
$44,895,
and that's a good price. I mean, that's
and this is with the dynamic package that has the bigger wheels and tires and bigger brakes, and some other fun features on there as well.
Yeah, so I drove the 3.3 liter V6 engine, and that was and I also had all-wheel drive, so it was quite different from the one that you drove. But when you talk about the infotainment system, one of the things I remember, this was in Seoul, that I drove it back in September of 2017, so it's been a while now. But one of the things I remember is that the infotainment system, the navigation, actually told us when speed bumps were ahead, because there's so many.
Really?
Yes, which was pretty amazing. And so the speed bumps, apparently, I said, why is this? And they said, Korea is the land of speed bumps. I'm like, okay, good to know. So it was very, very detailed. I mean, the navigation was literally down to the speed bumps. And I'm trying to look through quickly to see if I had any issues with the transmission. Again, this was a different engine. there was minimal turbo lag, and I thought that the overall, I didn't really have any particular comments. I remember finding the brakes were pretty grabby. They were very, very quick to, it was just touchy, I guess but we were also in traffic going back and forth, and it was just a constant thing until we got out onto the roads. But overall, I definitely found, as you did, that the car was really, really well equipped, really nice to drive, and the interior was well done as also. So I think, and the price point, again, I think that what you drove is terrific.
Yeah, and I think the base price, starts, if I'm not mistaken, it's around, it's about $35,000 for the 2-liter rear-wheel drive, which, is, that's a great package, and with the elite package and the prestige and the dynamic that were on this, it added about $10,000 to the bottom line. But you compare that to a 3 Series or a Mercedes C-Class, and or an Audi A4. And this is very competitive, and I think it's definitely a car that overall deserved to win the Car of the Year this year, the North American Car of the Year.
Right, exactly. Keep in mind too that Genesis has made some really strategic hirings in terms of picking people from the Germans, both on the design side, on the engineering side. They're the head of engineering for them is Albert Byron, who came from BMW, and specifically from BMW M, and so they've really been working hard to get specific people in to really tune and style these vehicles. But I do think that taking on the Germans is always really hard from a marketing standpoint. And so I think they've also, Genesis as a brand, is doing a good job of building their prestige, because I think they can be a standalone prestige brand. Don't try and and say to a current BMW owner, move to a Genesis. I think that that's a harder thing to do.
Yeah, and I don't think that they are doing that.
Right.
I think that they're trying to create their own brand image.
Right.
It's not. They're not. Certainly. They haven't tried to copy the Germans in terms of design. If you remember back. In the early '90s when Lexus and Infiniti first launched. Lexus. Looked. Their cars looked like Mercedes, and Infinitis looked like BMWs. And it took a while for them to find their own voice. And, I think, Hyundai's done a good job with Genesis, from a design perspective, giving it its own voice, and, really executing well on the mechanical stuff, making everything work and just executing well overall on this thing.
Right, I agree. And, let's not make the mistake that Cadillac has done by just continuously emphasizing this is as good as Germans. Just make a great Korean luxury vehicle, and I think they'll continue to do well.
Yeah, so far, as a brand, up until the launch of the G70, Genesis has struggled a little bit with sales, and partially because, they only had the 2 models, the G80 and the G90, both sedans.
Yes.
And, they're finally, I think later this year, I think sometime this year, they're going to finally launch their first crossovers.
Right.
And expand the brand that way. And I think, between the G70 and, adding some utility vehicles to the lineup, I think that's going to help really get the brand established.
I agree. I think, and that'll be terrific for them. And I, it's a brand filled with, the people behind the brand are really quality people. And I just, I'd love to see them succeed. Korean luxury is something that's really big. Certainly, we're seeing it on the health and beauty side, the fashion side, and so it makes sense that we see a Korean luxury brand.
K-pop and K-dramas.
K-pop, yeah, exactly. So no, I hope that they continue to do well, and I think, as you say, I think that the SUV will certainly help a lot in their success. So more power to them.
All right. Let's talk about what's been going on in Switzerland the last couple of days.
Yes, the Geneva Motor Show.
Yeah, and it's even though there's some manufacturers that, as with many auto shows these days, decided to skip Geneva again this year. There was a lot of interesting stuff that came out. And what do you want to start with?
So there's a couple. I think it's Geneva tends to appeal to such a wide range of consumers. So we've seen a really exciting smaller SUV from Alfa Romeo, the Tonale, which is smaller than the Stelvio, which I talked about on the show earlier. And I love this size of SUV. It's kind of competing in that X2 kind of the BMW X2 range, or the Audi Q3, or as some European periodicals reported on, the Mazda CX-3, which I thought was kind of funny because we wouldn't really think about Alfa and Mazda in the same breath in the U.S., but overseas it's a common thing. So I love the Tonale. I think it's terrific.
Yeah, and this thing's coming out. It's going to be in production next year, I think.
Yes.
So they showed it in concept form, but I think the production version is going to be pretty close to what we saw this week. And in terms of its size, this vehicle is built on the same platform as the Jeep Renegade and the Fiat 500X. And I know a lot of people don't really like the Renegade, and certainly the Renegade's ride quality leaves something to be desired in a lot of conditions. But I think I was actually quite fond of the 500X.
Yes.
When I drove it. And it's actually my preferred. If you don't need an off-road mini utility vehicle, the Renegade, you can get it as a trail hawk and do some serious off-roading with it.
Right.
But if you don't need that capability, I actually prefer the Fiat, which is I think it's a better looking vehicle and generally better executed in a lot of ways. And then the Tonale really kind of takes that up a whole nother level. With Alfa Romeo's design language and, based on what they've done with this concept, I think it looks fabulous.
It's gorgeous. I mean, you really almost can't tell the difference in pictures between the Stelvio and the Tonale, which is really fun. That's kind of what you want. It's this, pint-sized version of a gorgeous vehicle. On the Auto Express UK site, the Tonale has absolutely run away with the favorite, the latest poll for their pick of Geneva. It's 28% of consumers said that of the people taking the poll said this was their favorite vehicle, and the next one was the Volvo Polestar 2 at 18%. So this has clearly run away with the for on the consumer side of things with the show, and I think it's going to do really well in the States. It's a great vehicle to get women into the Alfa brand as well. I remember as I love the Stelvio. At the same time, arguably it could be a little bit big for a single person like myself. And also the price point, of course, is, I don't drive that much because I'm always driving something else. But I love the price point, anticipating the price point of the Tonale and the size. I just think the size is really, really fun. So I love this car. I think it's going to do really well for them in the States. The other one that Alfa was showing, I believe purely in concept, was the MeToo, MITO, MeToo, is that right? SUV?
Yeah.
Did you see pictures of that?
I did not see that one.
So this now
I remember the original Me Too.
Yes. So now,
which was it was, I think it was based on the 500.
Right. So now they're saying, first of all, I don't know if Me Too is going to resonate in the States because of the Me Too movement. So that could be a little bit of an issue. But they've actually now morphed this into a B-size segment crossover. They call it a crossover SUV. It's ridiculous. It's not. It's no more of a crossover SUV than the Chevy Bolt is, but it's adorable, and it's again designed to appeal more to women. I would be very surprised if this comes to the States, but it caught my eye because of the ridiculousness of costs of calling this an SUV. It's like, this is a hatchback. Let's just call it a hatchback. But it's really cute. I mean, it's adorable. But it is very, very interesting to think about, morphing some of these.
I don't think they, are you referring to the Auto Express story?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I don't think they actually showed this. I think this is just something that Auto Express was speculating on.
Oh, okay. Because it...
Yeah.
Because they were talking to Roberta Zerbe, and she was talking about pulling more women in, and
right.
And so she says a 5-door is more appropriate. So she's actually addressed the fact that it's moving from a 3-door to a 5-door. Right. But it could be speculation. But I also just and she says also that the Tonale isn't due until late 2020. So this smaller one wouldn't come out till 2022 or so. But I do just wish we would get away from the idea that this is a crossover or an SUV.
I know. Well, I mean, call it whatever you want. People seem to, want crossovers even if they aren't, or they want the idea of a crossover. And if you call something a crossover, it seems like they might be more willing to buy it, even though it really isn't one.
Yeah, exactly.
But, who knows? But yeah, the other interesting thing about the Tonale is its powertrain. It's a new plug-in hybrid powertrain.
Yes.
That's new for Fiat Chrysler, and variations of this same powertrain are also going to be added to the 500X and the Renegade next year. And it's similar. It sounds like it's similar in concept to what we have, or what Volvo does in their current plug-in hybrids, where it's a base front-wheel drive platform, and then you have an electric motor at the rear axle to provide electric all-wheel drive on demand, and more power and torque. So the electric, in this case, it's using a new 1.3 liter turbo 4-cylinder that's new for FCA, which is apparently 180 horsepower in this version. And then with the electric motor, you've got a total of 240 horsepower available, which in a small crossover this size, that's pretty good. That could be a really fun little vehicle to drive.
That sounds like all sorts of fun. And it's also a good strategy to get FCA into the electric vehicle space, where, which of course the late great Sergio Marchionne really didn't want to play in because they lose so much money on every car. So I think this is a good way to get them to play in that area that they have to move into at some point in time. So it'll be I can't wait for this thing to come out. I think it'll be tons of fun.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So speaking of electrification, there's actually a story that we've had on the rundown. I put it on the rundown a few weeks ago, and we ran out of time and never got to it, which was it was an article from Autocar, which talked about a return to coach building, which is something that was very common in the early part of the 20th century, with the way vehicles were built then, especially premium luxury vehicles back in those days. Everything was on a body on frame at that time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, brands like Bugatti and Duesenberg and Auburn, all these classic high-end brands, and even Lincoln and Cadillac, they would sell their rolling chassis to customers. Customers would go to a Lincoln dealer, and they would basically just buy a rolling chassis and then have it shipped to a coach builder to build a custom body on that. So you would have Duesenbergs with a dozen Duesenbergs, all with the same chassis and powertrain, but completely different bodies on them. And the same went for a lot of the other classic luxury brands of the early 20th century, and that kind of faded away over time. Particularly after the 1930s. It still happened on occasion. You'd have people like Jim Glickenhaus, who were fabulously wealthy, and they could afford to go to Pininfarina and give him an Enzo and say, create something unique for me. But for the most part, it's not something that happened a lot, especially as we've gone to more unibody platforms over the last 50 years. It made it a lot harder to do that. But now, with everybody moving towards electrification and everybody adopting these skateboard-style chassis, where you basically have a giant battery pack in the middle of the car, and you bolt suspension to the front and rear, and and motors, electric motors on there. You're kind of back to what we had in those early days of a rolling chassis, with an engine and powertrain and everything in there, but it's all electric now. And Volkswagen at Geneva this week, they announced that their MEB platform, which is going to be going into production later this year, with the ID hatchback, and then it's going to spawn a whole slew of models from brands across the VW group, including the Audi Q4 e-tron that they also showed, and a Seat hatchback that they also showed this week. They're going to make that MEB platform available to anybody that wants to use it, for low volume production, to put their own body designs on there and do different applications with it, which is really cool, because it's going to give us this amazing opportunity to perhaps see some really interesting low volume vehicles, that are nonetheless well engineered from a mechanical standpoint, and it'll at the same time it'll give Volkswagen the opportunity to scale up their volume, to get more scale of the hardware they're building, and hopefully drive their costs down.
Well, and economies of scale is kind of the holy grail of doing electrification and doing smaller runs of these vehicles. And so it's a fantastic way of getting the economies of scale that they need for these niche vehicles that consumers are wanting. So yeah, I think it's really, really a fascinating opportunity to do some customization, do smaller batches, and yet not break the bank.
Yeah, and one of the first examples we saw of that this week, is the VW Buggy.
Yes.
They built a modern iteration of the classic Volkswagen powered dune buggy. Back in the, I guess, was it in the early 60s, or was it even the 50s when the first ones were built?
Yeah, I think it was the 60s, and I looked at it and thought, where are my Ken and Barbie dolls?
Yeah, exactly. It's very much like that. So you've got this classic dune buggy design, which was built, originally built on the Beetle platform. But now it's on this MEB electric platform, and one of the things about the MEB platform is like Tesla's Model 3 and S and X platforms, and the BMW i3, because you've got this the primary motor is so small and light. They're going back from front wheel drive to doing rear wheel drive as the base setup for that, and then they're also going to offer all wheel drive as an option, with a second motor at the front axle. But now, because you don't have to package a much larger engine in there, they're doing rear wheel drive because you've got the better driving dynamics from that. And you're splitting up the workload between the front wheels doing the steering and the rear wheels doing the propulsion, and so there's all kinds of fascinating potential out of all this.
Besides the fact that it's just that playfulness that I think Volkswagen really needs. They've had a rough go a couple of years ago, and I think that people are excited. Self-inflicted. But people are excited. It's a brand that, pretty consistently a consumer, they want Volkswagen to succeed. In the U.S., this is a brand that hasn't had particularly high volume, but people come back to it. And especially Gen X, we love this brand. And so I think this is just a great, great opportunity to just have loads of fun in a Volkswagen, which is, something that we've wanted for a very long time. So I think it's great. I think that the first ones came out in the mid '60s, so that was before my time, just before my time, but certainly by 1970, I was playing with my Barbie dolls. So I want a pink one. I want a pink one right away.
Yeah. So electrification was all the rage in Geneva this week, and we saw electric vehicles at both extremes of the automotive landscape. So we had and then everything in between, like that buggy. At the low end, we had the Honda E prototype. Which is essentially the production version of a concept. I think it was the original concept was the Urban E a couple of years ago. Which kind of was, from a design perspective, was kind of a throwback to the old Honda 600s of the late '60s and early '70s. What do you think about this one?
Well, again, I think that we're seeing, we've got to have opportunities at all levels for EVs. And so I think that, Honda coming in with this kind of urban concept, it's something that the market needs. We have to build these small cars, not necessarily for the US, but for the rest of the world. And that's something that we always have to keep in mind. This thing is tiny. It's even more compact than an i3 for perspective. And so I think that we need this type of vehicle. We need this kind of low cost, small product that I think will hopefully do well in other parts of the world, not necessarily in the U.S.
Yeah, I agree. As an urban EV, I mean, this is not something that's necessarily designed, for long Autobahn drives. Right. And it's actually it's not even going to be sold here in North America. I think it's going to be Europe and Japan only. Is the plan right now. It only has a 120-mile range, but for something to drive around town, I think it'll be a great option.
Yes, I think so too. I think it's, again, we're gonna continue to see EVs at across the board in all shapes and sizes and all price points, and to some extent all ranges as well. That 120 mile range is tough. It's not the comfort zone of consumers, but it doesn't mean that they can't adapt to that they're not gonna. Again, it depends. Is this better than their current solution? So, if this urban EV is better than what they currently have, whether it's their own personal gas engine or petrol engine, or relying on public transportation, Ubers and taxis, then if people perceive this as being better than that, then they're going to go for it. Otherwise, we could see it struggle.
Yeah, and I think that's part of why they're focusing it on the European market, where I think on average, Europe, the average number of miles driven annually is lower. I think it's about 10,000 as opposed to closer to 15 here in the U.S.
Sure.
And I think for intercity travel, there's a lot more options there, that don't necessarily involve driving. I mean, you've got high-speed rail there, to go almost anywhere on the continent. In addition to flying, which a lot of people also do. But I think a vehicle like this, for your driving around town, I think is potentially a great option for that market. Not so much here, obviously, but certainly in Europe, where people are used to driving smaller vehicles.
Right. Absolutely.
So at the opposite extreme of EVs in Geneva, we've got the Pininfarina Battista and the Aston Martin Lagonda all-terrain concept.
Yes. So Aston Martin absolutely killed it at Geneva. I mean, I think they really surprised people with this. The Lagonda name, the Lagonda brand is going to be Aston Martin's electric vehicle brand. So that's what they've come out with. They've established that, and this SUV is just, I mean, it's a I don't know the exact size of it, but it's fairly large. I love the fact that it is an SUV. The DBX, the Aston Martin DBX, will come out before this, but then they'll come out with this. They'll have the Lagonda all-terrain concept, which I think looks great. It's a interesting play on, the Aston Martin beauty styling, which is incredibly important to the brand. And it really was just a show stunner. I really missed Geneva. I love that show, and I would have loved to have seen some of these concepts in person. So I can't wait for, hopefully some of this stuff will be in New York at the middle of April. But I think this Lagonda, it looks just absolutely gorgeous. And the thing with the electric vehicles is that it's very much of an early adopter technology. And so going luxury first, I think is very, very appropriate. It's, we've mentioned this before. It's one of the things that I wish GM had gone with their original gut of making Cadillac more of their electric vehicle brand. They're doing it now, but it's 10 years later.
They should have done it a long time ago.
They should have done it immediately. I remember anecdotally talking to people about electric vehicles, and they said, look, I work all day in Manhattan. I don't want to come home to a Chevy. They wanted to come home to a luxury vehicle. And, that's their mindset. So I think that Aston Martin reviving the Lagonda brand as an electric vehicle brand is something that is very strategically clever, because this brand isn't particularly well known. And so let's get it off to a strong start and very clear and definitive what this is. And it's one of the things that Genesis has struggled a little bit with, in their launch, where first it was the Genesis nameplate, and then it became a brand, and then they've kind of had some stuttering with the launch of Genesis as a luxury brand. And so I think that Aston Martin has done a good job of saying, the Lagonda is our electric vehicle brand.
Yeah, I agree, and from a design perspective, this thing, as you said, is just stunning.
It is,
and especially when you compare it to, I was in Geneva 10 years ago, 2009, when when Aston Martin showed their first SUV concept and called it a Lagonda. The 2009 Lagonda SUV concept was not a good design. I remember everybody who saw that thing thought it was just hideous. And fortunately, it died on the vine and never got close to production. But this new one, this is like an incredibly sleek, tall, sport wagon. More of a shooting brake kind of design. Kind of a slightly high riding shooting brake. Rather than traditional SUV,
right?
Which especially in the luxury market, is kind of the direction a lot of companies are going. And with the EV platform with the battery under the floor, it gives you a nice spacious interior, and the way it's all been executed is just phenomenal. And I think that this has some really huge potential for really establishing the Lagonda brand again.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Now, Aston Martin is very concerned and very caught up right now in Brexit and what happens with Brexit. So that's a whole nother issue that they're dealing with. But I think they absolutely killed it at Geneva. They also showed the Vanquish Vision concept, which will rival the McLaren. And that, again, is absolutely stunning. And then they also showed the Aston Martin 003 hypercar. And so, they just, it was just one after the other that they rolled out, and each one
and
was
the
just
production version of the Valkyrie.
Yes, and the production version of the Valkyrie as well. So this was definitely Aston Martin's show from a luxury standpoint.
No doubt. All right, let's finish it up with the Battista. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the Battista.
I haven't seen the Battista. You're throwing me off here. Wait a minute. Which one? Right. Which one is the Battista?
The Pininfarina Battista. It's a 1,900 horsepower electric supercar.
Yes. Well, 1900 horsepower, sure. Why not?
Yeah, I mean, why not just go for 2,000?
Exactly.
But I think the thing about this one, I guess they're going to produce a limited number of them. But what's this is the classic Pininfarina, gorgeous Italian design.
Yes.
I think it's not totally original in its design. I think when I first saw it, I saw a lot of Ferrari 458, 488 in this one.
Yeah, and looking at the pictures, yeah,
but, it's still good.
It still is. It's beautiful. I see a little bit of the Acura NSX in it as well.
Mm-hmm.
The front is. I can't say that I love the front. It's very shark-like, which is typical. The headlamps are really small, so it's a little harsh, I think, from the front. The interior looks spectacular. I like the side view a little bit more, I think, from like the front quarter panel. But it's just it's a ridiculous. I mean, these cars are so. They're almost cartoonish. Like I think they probably the original the mid-level sketches are probably close to cartoonish, and then they always try and kind of pull it back towards elegant. And this is again, I'd love to see it in person. I'd love to wash this car to be able to feel it, hand wash it.
Yeah.
Because that's when you really start to feel all the dips and curves and lines and such of a car. I mean, it's kind of crazy, but I would kick it out of my driveway,
they're planning
though.
to make 150 of them at $2.6 million a piece.
And they will sell every one.
Probably.
Yeah. And, we also can't get out from talking about the Bugatti La Voiture Noire, the most expensive new car ever sold, of which there was one.
You mean the black car?
The black. Yes, the black car.
Yes, which is the literal translation of what you just said.
Yes, La Bugatti La Voiture Noire. Yes. I mean,
it's pretty amazing.
Come on. That's just ridiculous. I got to drive the Bugatti Chiron, which was both the most exciting and terrifying hour of my life. And the funny thing is, it was in Greenwich where I live. So kind of driving it on some streets that I knew a little bit and desperately trying not to get a speeding ticket was a balance. But, this is something that is, it was 12.5 million. I don't know if that's what it actually sold, if that's what somebody actually paid for it. But,
for this new one?
Yeah, for the
it says 19
car
here in this article I'm looking at.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all right. So I think I knew it had sold for more than that. First of all, I'm dying to know who actually bought it. But I think it's just something that is so. What I love about this car is that it reminds us all of what the passion and beauty that can be in the industry, even as we move to this mobility as a service kind of, pedantic sort of practicality. This Bugatti, I think, just kind of reminds us of that there's still so much passion in this industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for those that can afford something like this, to be able to, get, virtually anything, to have something completely custom, and I think, that's where I think, going back to where we started, with the coach building thing, I think that there's some amazing opportunities going forward, because of the way, the vehicle architecture is changing, with electrification, to do some really wild things, at a much lower price point, something that's much more attainable for the average person. I think, companies will be able to come up with some really neat ideas, and build them on this kind of, modern architecture, and offer them, at something that, can be attained by, by the average person, as opposed to just, the insanely super wealthy that can afford a $19 million car.
Yeah, and you know what? You make a good point also about this attainability when we think about the decline of personal ownership, of personal vehicle ownership. I, as if the people that are processing this come true, that vehicle ownership is going to change dramatically in the next even 10 years, we will still some people will still, it won't be practical for people to not have a car, like in your situation, even where Uber, Lyft, ride sharing, ride hailing, all these things are not practical. We will still need to have vehicles available at a reasonable price. And while we may not sell 90 million new cars around the world as we do today, if that number drops to 45 million, and then the rest of them are fleet, very kind of generic vehicles, I think that we do need avenues of opportunity for personal vehicle ownership at an affordable price, and that coach building may really be a throwback, but maybe something that is viable going forward to try and keep personal ownership alive.
I totally agree with you there, and I certainly hope that's the way it turns out. And on that thought, I'm going to let you get back to your vacation.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for dialing in from Calcutta tonight, or this morning in your case.
Yes.
And we'll talk to you next week.
Yes, when I'm back in the States.
All right.
Thanks.
Have a good trip home.
Thanks so much, Sam.
All right, and welcome back to the second half of episode 100 of Wheelbearings. Rebecca has gone on to spend another day in Calcutta, and now Dan has taken her place. Dan, what's going on, man?
I'm not in India.
No.
I'm in the, and as crowded as Boston seems sometimes, I'm sure the traffic is actually quite manageable.
Yeah, I think compared to what I've seen of India, I would say that is absolutely true. And when you get a chance to listen to what Rebecca had to say about, like, for example, buses in Calcutta don't actually come to a full stop. They just kind of slow down, and you hop on and hop off as it's kind of,
Right.
it's cruising along, and then moves on to the next stop. So it's,
Well, and I think but like the hop on, hop off means like actually hop on, like sometimes on the top of the bus. So
that in some cases that is true. Yeah.
Yeah. That it's a fascinating, enormous country, and I was thinking yesterday, because I was listening to Marketplace, and they were having a discussion about how in India there's a very large potential labor force, but there's not as many jobs, and they're a young labor force, and it seems like you could, if you wanted to commit to trying to make India a center of low-cost manufacturing, it would be a great place to do it. You'd probably have a lot of work to do, but they could sort of rival China in a way, where China seems to be getting to a point where they're not the low-cost center that they once were.
Yeah, I mean, it's like every developing market. As the economy develops and people start to earn some money and get some spending power, it eventually starts to lift everybody up. I mean, we saw the same thing happen in Japan, we saw it happen in Taiwan, and then more recently we saw it happen in Korea, in South Korea. Where as the market develops, then the workers start demanding more, higher pay, and that gives them more spending power, and the whole economy grows. And we're seeing that starting to happen in China, and as a result, a lot of the Chinese manufacturers that build most of the stuff that we buy right now, are desperately trying, like Foxconn, for example, it builds most of Apple's stuff. They are desperately trying to shift towards more automation instead of employing tens or hundreds of thousands of human beings.
Yeah. Oh, and you know what, too? Ford is they're getting into India pretty heavily with Tata, aren't they?
With Mahindra, they have a deal with Mahindra.
Oh, Mahindra.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that was also one of the things that I caught up on was Autoline, one of the recent episodes, they had someone from Ford on talking about that and how Ford has kind of acknowledged, like, hey, you know what? Like, we're not a car company anymore, but we're really good in light trucks and utilities. So that's what we're going to focus on, which makes a lot of sense. But also, they partnering up with an Indian manufacturer and looking at how logistics and supply chain and stuff are done in India versus how a Western manufacturer does it, trying to understand, like, how do we not screw this up? It was interesting where they find common ground and where they learn from each other. But yeah, I mean, India is such a big population too.
Yeah, 1.3 billion people, and it's almost as big as China.
You could go there and convert people to customers and do okay. It'll be fascinating to see what happens with sort of global markets in the next decade.
Right, and that's basically what Henry Ford did in the early 20th century. Transform the workers into customers, by paying them more.
Yeah, so they could buy the things that they built.
Exactly.
All right, well.
So,
sorry for the tangent.
What have you been driving, Dan?
I have a 2019 Jeep Wrangler Unlimited Rubicon.
Ooh, the full off-road package.
Yeah. God, I hate driving the Rubicon on the road. I like the Wrangler, and the Unlimited is certainly the most I think it's got to be the most popular Wrangler model, just because of the four-door practicality. I see a lot more of those than I see
I think
two-doors.
it is, yeah. It certainly is now.
And I'm much more of like a Wrangler Sahara kind of guy, or just the standard Wrangler, because I'm spending my time with it on the road, and the Wrangler by its very nature is as refined as they've made it. The new JL is amazingly refined for compared to the JK. It's only going to get so good, and the Rubicon undoes some of that on road good behavior because it has larger tires. It's lifted a little bit. It's designed to be very capable off road, and by its very nature, that makes it crappy on the highway. And so I found that the sweet spot for this one is like 60 to 65 miles an hour, and it's fine. But it feels very Jeepy in that Wrangler kind of way. The classic Wrangler CJ sort of attitude is there. And what I like about this one the most is that this is my first time driving one of the Wranglers with the turbo 4-cylinder.
What do you think of it?
And I love it. It's fantastic. I think it's the best Wrangler engine in... I don't know.
Since the old AMC 6-cylinder?
Yeah. And so I've always liked 4-cylinder Wranglers. I know that they don't go worth a shit. This one does because it's got a turbo.
Right.
But in the past, the 4-cylinder Wrangler has just been like, you can't be in a hurry. But it always has
but in those days, or CJs, as they were then, they were for the off-roaders. You didn't have regular people, so, for lack of a better term, driving around in CJs. I mean, it just wasn't it was too much of a hardcore vehicle. It was what the Rubicon is today, and when you're running off road, you don't need a lot of power because you're usually not going very fast.
Yeah, power is not often your friend in those situations, and I think that's where the Turbo 4 might be a little bit of a challenge because it has a non-linear torque delivery and it has a lot of low-end torque. It is very linear, but still the nature of a turbocharged engine is sometimes you're going to get more than you asked for.
On the other hand, in a Rubicon, when you put it in four-wheel drive low, I mean, I tried this last summer at FCA's What's New event at their Chelsea Proving Grounds. I took the Wrangler on the off-road course that they have, and you put it in 4 low, and in third gear at 4,000 RPM, you're going about 8 or 9 miles an hour.
Yeah, so
it doesn't really matter. I mean, you're doing all the linearity. It makes no difference.
Yeah, you know what? I'm sure that it's just been designed to be phenomenal off-road. But when I think about it too, and it's not some sort of like historical precedence kind of thing, because I like progress, as shocking as that may seem, but the Jeep, like with a 4-cylinder, that's a return to form. All of those World War II Jeeps, the first Jeeps, they were all 4-cylinders. So they were either the Willys Go Devil or Ford Flathead 4. So Jeeps are supposed to have a 4-cylinder option, and this is a great one. It has ready torque off the line. It's light on its feet. It has plenty of power when you need it. I don't really want a super fast Jeep. It would be entertaining to see what a Hellcat and a Wrangler would do, but I don't think that's.
I'm not sure
something
entertaining is necessarily the word I'd use. More like terrifying.
Yeah, well,
especially in a
some
Rubicon.
people. Yeah, but I really like the character of it better than the Pentastar, which is a great engine, but the Pentastar likes to be revved to make its power, where a Turbo 4 is a little torquier. So the character, I think, fits the Wrangler better. And the fuel economy is very good. I'm getting like 19.5 combined, which is probably the best I've ever gotten from a Wrangler Unlimited that I've driven. They just like reliably don't get good fuel economy because of what they are. So I'm impressed with that. And it's nice with the 8-speed auto. The Rubicon stuff, I understand it makes a lot of profit for Chrysler, and it does
for a certain segment of customers. It is absolutely the right vehicle. Like my neighbor, it has I think he's got it's a late '90s or mid '90s Wrangler, which was probably like
it's a TJ.
TJ, yeah. And he's got it all tricked out. He hauls it behind his RV out to Moab every year and takes it up north to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and goes really goes out on serious off-road boulder crawling adventures with that thing. And he does not drive that thing to work. It's strictly for play for him, and that's the kind of customer that the Rubicon is built for.
Yeah, and so you know what? That's fine. But you're also going to spend $53,000 to get one.
That is very true.
Like this. And this is not even a full boat Wrangler. Like I may be missing it, but I don't think I have heated seats.
I think you probably are missing it. I think they are there.
I will look again. I didn't find them in the control screen.
I seem to recall the one I had last summer did have heated seats in it, but the switches are not necessarily the most obvious.
Okay, I'll have to look around and see what I'm missing. Yeah. But it's really hard to say anything critical of the Wrangler, because all of the criticism equals like the retort is, well, that's A, that's not what it's for, and B, that is how it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And I love that the JL is it's full of very thoughtful touches, nice touches everywhere. I noticed today that on the door hinges, they say T50 on them, and that refers to the Torx screw to remove the doors. So it also comes with a little socket set in the glove compartment that has the Torx drivers.
And when you do take the doors off and you take all those screws out, and the same with the roof, when you open the tailgate, molded into the plastic trim when you open the tailgate, there's a whole bunch of holes, and there's embossed markings on there with, here's where the screws for the right front door and the left front door and the right rear and the left rear and the roof panels go, and they're all sized to fit. So you put everything in there. As you take those pieces off, you drop the screws in there and then flip the carpet back over it, and you're not going to lose them. You're going to know exactly where they are.
Yeah, those are the things that I think they're sort of called surprise and delight in some circles. Mm-hmm. But those are the things that do make a difference. They make you feel pleased with your investment, your $53,000.
So have you been driving this thing around with the doors off?
Absolutely not. It's been in the teens.
Okay.
The other thing I love about it is it has a nuclear fusion powered heater. It gets very, very toasty, which is lovely.
That's called the turbocharger.
Yeah, exactly. I want it to snow, so I can get out in it and try to drive it around in some crappy weather, because that's when I find that I love Wranglers the most. They're just, they're great in terrible conditions, and their charm is undeniable.
Yes.
And I do think that the 4-cylinder is probably my favorite match for powertrain in a very long time. I really like the combination. I like the way it behaves. I do find that it's a little loud, and I know that's weird to call a Wrangler loud, but like from the outside, when you start it up and stuff, just the engine noise from the outside, it makes a bit of racket.
Yeah, well, and direct injected engines tend to do that. Those injectors, they're running at very high pressures, and most cars with direct injected engines, they've those big plastic shields they put over the engine on all the new cars. There's also some sound deadening material on the underside of that, and when you take that off, you can really hear those things tapping. They sound almost like like an old school diesel in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and on a cold start, it's running a little high idle, so that makes it a little noisier too. But once it settles down, it's okay. And the exhaust note to me reminded me of the old DJ5 male Jeeps, so I thought that was amusing. So yeah, I can't not recommend the Wrangler if the Wrangler is what you want, and if the Rubicon is what you want. Like you have money to burn. I hope you use it, because for me the price is really just the biggest barrier, and the Wrangler has for a lot of years now not been especially cheap.
Right. Although if you forego some of the more luxury options that are available on there. And even go for a soft top and go for a 2-door, you can get a 2-door Rubicon starting at $38,000.
That's still a lot of dough.
It is, but it's a lot less than $53,000.
Yeah, to me, a Wrangler should be in the 20s, and you can get one in the 20s.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure. It won't be a Rubicon, but it'll still be pretty capable. And yeah, that's just my perception of what a Jeep should be. And I think too, if you're looking at the Wrangler Rubicon, there are other options. There's like the 4Runner SR5 or Limited is also very capable. It's an older vehicle, but it's an enclosed SUV. It's got more space than a Wrangler Unlimited. Might actually even be a little shorter, or certainly it's wider, so it doesn't feel as the Wrangler Unlimited feels kind of like like a tuna boat or a barge, just because it's long and narrow. So there are some choices, and I don't think a 4Runner SR5 is exactly cheap.
No, well, none of these vehicles are anymore. And then don't forget, Ford's got the new Bronco coming out, which is, they're aiming that thing directly at the Wrangler as an alternative to the Wrangler. And I think GM is reportedly also working on something probably from the GMC brand that would be designed to take on the Wrangler as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens when the market gets a little saturated. They can probably handle one, maybe two more competitors, but then the interest is going to start to drop off. So, or there just won't be enough total sales to really support any one of them. It'll just get diluted.
Yeah.
Across, so it'll be interesting to watch. But yeah, what I'd like to see is, instead of the Rubicon, or in addition to the Rubicon, I'd like to see a Wrangler Unlimited Limited or Overland or something where it's just much more luxurious. Where they put some extra sound deadening in it, put those really nice Grand Cherokee Summit seats in it, and make it really cushy.
Why not just buy a Grand Cherokee then?
Well, because sometimes people like the sort of, the rough and tumble appearance and reputation. People buy G-Wagons for kind of the same reason, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I think there's an opportunity.
And Land Rover Discoveries.
Yeah. So
speaking of which, there's a new Discovery coming soon too. So.
Yeah, and that's my product planning advice. They won't take it. They probably looked at it and realized.
I don't know about that.
Idea,
I would not be the least bit surprised if if FCA comes out with a more luxurious trim level for the Wrangler at some point in the not too distant future.
I'd be surprised. I'm sure that they've looked at it, and if they can make the numbers work, yes. But maybe it's one of those things where just the numbers don't work, and the people who spend the big money on a Wrangler are looking for the stuff like the Rubicon versus the luxury. But I will watch enthusiastically from the sidelines because that's not my job. All right, do we want to talk about some topics, some Geneva?
Yeah, well, let's stay on Jeep for a moment first, and one of the news items that came out of Geneva was some Jeep news. Rebecca and I talked about the Alfa Romeo Tonale, which is right now it's a concept, but a production version is coming next year, which is their new compact crossover to slot in below the Stelvio. But the Tonale shares its platform with at least the Renegade and Fiat 500X, and possibly also the Compass, Jeep Compass. And in Geneva, Jeep announced that plug-in hybrid versions of the Renegade and Compass will be coming to production next year. Jeep had already previously announced that there's going to be a plug-in hybrid version of the Wrangler next year. And so now there's going to be the Compass and Renegade as well, and presumably the 500X, I would guess at some point too. Based on they haven't given really full details of the hybrid architecture, but based on what they've said, it looks like this is essentially a similar kind of layout to what Volvo does on their plug-in hybrids. So it's a through-the-road hybrid where the engine is powering the front wheels, and then you have an electric motor at the rears. And this thing's going to have 31 miles of electric range at speeds up to over 80 miles an hour in electric mode, and as much as 240 horsepower. They're going to have a couple of different configurations, but up to 240 horsepower. So can you imagine a 240 horsepower Renegade?
I'd be all set with that. No, the Renegade is not my favorite. I don't like the Renegade. I think if I were to do a Renegade, I'd just buy a Compass or a 500X.
Yeah.
But,
I agree. I think that the Renegade's a little bit too rough and choppy in its ride quality. When I drove both the Renegade and the 500X a couple of years ago, and I did prefer the 500X.
And the Renegade is it's a little too kitschy. It's trying too hard. With the 500X is just it's a 500 shaped vehicle,
Yeah.
it's just good, and it's kind of like quietly good. I don't know that it gets enough of the attention over in the Fiat store. Not that anything
nothing much gets any attention in the Fiat store these days, which is too bad because I think the 500X is actually a pretty cool looking little vehicle.
I do too. I think it's actually probably the best thing they have on offer.
Yeah.
In terms of what the American consumer needs.
No, absolutely.
And a turbocharged 240 horsepower version of that, sign me up, kinda.
Yeah.
That sounds like a good time. And I think, maybe this is better posed as a question. Do you think that this is a move to sort of quickly boost the fuel economy of the things that are selling? Because we know that Jeep and Ram are basically carrying all of FCA right now. So
no doubt about that. And certainly for the ZEV states like California and other states, they need to have vehicles like this available because they're the 500Es that they're selling now, that they're still selling now, they're selling those at a huge loss. And so they need something that's going to be more commercially viable and that's going to be appealing to, something that customers are going to be willing to pay more for than they're willing to pay for a 500E. And then, especially these small Jeeps, part of the reason why they debuted the Renegade and the Compass plug-in hybrids in Geneva is because they actually sell quite a few of these in Europe as well. And, diesel is rapidly falling out of favor there, so they need to have a plug-in hybrid option there in order to meet European emission standards. And the other thing that's also new in this is a new 1.3 liter turbo 4-cylinder that's going to be the base engine in here with the plug-in hybrid, and that's I think it's a one in the 240 horsepower plug-in hybrid version. That engine is 180 horsepower.
So what is that based off anything that they currently have? Is it like sort of the 2-liter that I was just talking about in the Jeep, just with a little bit less bore and stroke?
No,
or is it
I think
completely new
I
engine?
think it's a new engine. It may be derived, it may share some architectural stuff with the current Fiat 1.4 liter, but it sounds like it's a pretty new engine. They haven't given a lot of details on it yet, but when you that's too small a displacement to go down, from a 2-liter. Basically, whenever anybody, 1.5 to 1.6 liters is kind of the cutoff. And so anything less than that, is usually a small 4-cylinder family, and then, 2 liters and up, is a larger 4-cylinder family.
Yeah, so that's true. I think if you're going to drop a half a liter off a 4-cylinder, off a 2-liter 4-cylinder, you're going to make it a triple.
Yeah, which is what a lot of that's what BMW does. That's what Mercedes does, and other companies do the same thing. So
it's curious to me that if they already have a 1.4, that they develop a whole new engine to be 100cc smaller, but there's reasons, I suppose. But
that's why I said they haven't given a lot of detail on it, so we don't. It may not be all new. It may be based on, it may have the same bore spacing and deck height, and I wouldn't be surprised if it does, as the 1.4 liter. That way they can reuse a lot of the same tooling for machining the blocks and stuff like that.
That's true. I guess if the expensive tooling stays, and the you can change pretty much everything else around that. You can do a completely new cylinder head and manifolds and all that stuff. But
right, and you still have the same mounting points, for the engine in the vehicle, and those mounting points, are also used, when you're machining the block, when it's going down a transfer line. The transfer line is the one of the most expensive parts about doing engine production, from the manufacturing side, and if you have those same location points for those blocks as they go down and go through the machining processes and then through assembly, you save a lot of money, on tooling that up.
Yeah, that's been one of the more fascinating sides of the discussion about the lower cost Tesla Model 3 is just the way you save money, or the way you find those economies in car production. It's not necessarily taking stuff out of the car. It's you think about just the process of manufacturing. It's the tools that you have to create to put them together. It's the differences. It costs you money to make them different. Mm-hmm. So all of those things to streamline the amount of variations in the content, and who's building those different things. So even the wheels, are you making the wheels? So you're going to have to come up with a whole steel wheel production line if you want to offer a low-cost steel wheel versus the alloys. Well, that's now you've got to spin that up. You're going to operate at a loss for a while. It's just that's really fascinating to dig into, and so just to sort of cover that here too it's interesting.
Yeah, that's all. Manufacturing engineers are the unsung heroes of this industry. Because without a good manufacturing engineering team, throughout the entire process, from body stamping to machining and assembly and everything else, none of the you could design the greatest car in the world, but if you can't put it together, consistently, and at a relatively low cost and high quality, then it doesn't matter. Yeah,
of course. So it's a fascinating little vehicle too. The Alfa is interesting because it pulls in a lot of cues from older Alfas. Especially like older Alfa hatches and stuff. It really looks good.
Yeah, it does. I especially like the front end. The front end execution. It reminds me a lot of the previous Alfa Romeo Brera coupe, which wasn't available in North America,
but should have been.
Yeah,
it's just tragic. Yeah, it reminds me of the Brera
and the 159, which was also another really nice one.
Yeah, and so that's. Do we think that, because I'm starting to see more Julias, which surprises me, but there's no like sort of volume alpha. Is that what this is supposed to do? Is just be that compact crossover volume car that's, the Stelvio we talked about, and it's a lot of fun, but it's a little larger. It's a more premium. I guess it's kind of like a mid-size crossover. So this is sort of to be more of a bread and butter car.
Yeah, this will be the entry level Alpha. And certainly here in North America, it'll probably be the highest volume Alfa Romeo.
And that's good that it shares a bunch of stuff with cheaper cars. Then,
yeah,
I mean, that's very smart. The Alfa story has been kind of a slow thing. Their return was supposed to be. I feel like it was supposed to be a lot quicker.
Yeah, and I'm sure 6 years ago Sergio Marchionne felt the same way.
Yeah. Well, I guess too. Like if they were going to come back with sedans, and then the market just kind of shifted under them, and they said, "Oh, now we have to come up with some crossovers, or we're not going to make it." I guess that makes sense. And the Compass is going to be great with a hybrid powertrain too. I think that's really, really smart for Jeep to make those offerings, because those are the Jeeps that those are the entry Jeeps, or those are the Jeeps that people in a more urban environment who either don't have the money or the space for a Grand Cherokee, definitely not for a Wrangler, or don't want to put up with a Wrangler. They want a Jeep, but they want something that is a little bit more conventional, a little bit more comfortable. That's the Compass. The Compass so impressed me in its latest generation. The way they changed that from just kind of a crappy economy car into something that really is like a 3/4 scale Grand Cherokee. It's really, really nice. To put a hybrid in that, I think is just a really smart move, because I think that buyer is looking for economy, and that buyer might cross shop with a Prius or something else, but decide that, hey, I like the Jeep, I want the Jeep style, and I can get a plug-in hybrid with it. Great, that's really smart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, shall we move on?
Yeah, I babbled enough about that one.
All right. What's next?
Well, the Honda E prototype made its premiere in Geneva, which I didn't think that thing was ever going to actually come to production.
Well, they announced a while ago that they were going to produce it. There's a couple other variants of it that they've shown as concepts that they said that they don't plan to produce. But the other thing, the thing to keep in mind is that we're not going to see it here. It's not coming to North America. It's only for Europe and Japan.
Yeah, we get the forbidden Hondas are always the best,
I mean, this is a small car, and it certainly, from Honda's perspective, it makes sense not to bother trying to sell it in North America, because there's just no market for a car like this here.
Well, there's no volume market.
Well, sorry. No, not enough volume to justify, going through the whole certification process for the U.S. market.
That's true. But so here's a question, because it's an EV. So is it actually less expensive to certify an EV for the U.S. market? So you could bring it in at a limited volume and say, we're only going to sell these in urban centers where traffic density is a problem, and it's easier to park. It's not going to do huge distances.
You still have to crash test it, and that's a big part of the cost. Going through all the crash protection testing.
Is it that much different though than like the Euro NCAP testing?
It's different enough that you have to do everything. There's not, none of the testing that you do for Euro NCAP is going to carry over to the U.S. testing.
No, but I guess my thought is like, you have to pay to test it, obviously, but it'll pass. If it passes your NCAP, it's a pretty good.
Yeah, it almost certainly will. And in general, manufacturers are, they're designing everything now to meet all the different global standards. In Europe and in North America and in China, and so I don't doubt that it would pass, but just the cost of going through that process to certify it for North America is, and particularly because it's a small car, it has a relatively small battery. It's only got a 120-mile range, which means that
that's
it's
true.
probably not going to be competitive in the U.S. market. In Europe, where things are closer together, a lot of people that do drive, tend to drive more locally. There's often, city cars are much more popular in Europe than they are here, because there's a lot of drivers that don't necessarily do a lot of highway driving with these types of vehicles, and so it makes more sense in that market. Here, its range is going to be too short to really be competitive in this marketplace, and you're not going to be able to get. I don't think you're going to be able to attract enough customers that are going to want a car like this in the U.S.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Some of it is down to customer preference too. Like, I don't know too many people who drive 120 miles a day. I guess that's not outrageous, especially in certain areas of the country where the roads are sort of flat and straight. It's not uncommon to do a 60-mile one-way commute, and so your round trip is 120. I mean, I do 45, so my round trip every day is 90. So it's not that different, I suppose.
Yeah, and when you factor in some of the things like weather conditions and other stuff that is going to knock down your range, then it's going to start to have a significant impact.
Yeah, that is true. But I do think that in the U.S., battery capacity is sort of like the new engine size. And we probably buy more than we need because it just like having a lot of horsepower underfoot is sometimes a comfort. I think having double or even more of the range you're going to use at any one sitting is also a comfort, and especially with EVs where sometimes the range is unpredictable. It's not guaranteed that you're going to get it depending on ambient temp and other factors. So
yeah.
It's too bad we're not going to get it, though. I was trying to hold on to a glimmer of hope, like, if they don't have to certify the engines for emissions. But you know what? That money probably gets burned up because it's more expensive to make an EV anyway. You got to pay for the batteries and stuff.
Yeah, well, and that's I think that's part of why I think this vehicle would struggle in the U.S. market, because Honda would basically have to sell it at a loss, and it's just not really worth it for them.
Yeah, it would be worth it for me to see it here because it's just I don't know. Small cars are neat. And
I don't disagree. I love small cars.
Yeah, it's really So what we can glean from it though is like maybe that interior with the screens across is going to be something that we see in newer Hondas that are coming.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely see stuff like that coming to Hondas in this market.
Yeah, and I don't know how to feel about that.
Yeah.
I love the ergonomics of it. I love I love the sort of like, I guess, design of it, not the ergonomics. The ergonomics give me pause because it's touch screen. But I just love the sort of rectilinear design, the way it stretches out in front of the driver, and it's not real swoopy. But yeah, it does look like we're still continuing to have car UI that's like buttons that are too small to touch while you're driving down the road, hitting bumps and stuff. So yeah, we'll see what they do with it.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get a chance to at least sample it at some point, but probably not.
They'll fly you somewhere. You can go see.
All right. So why don't we finish off, let's see, with some talk about Tesla's updated superchargers.
Oh, yeah. So it's basically, are they calling it the supercharging version 3?
Yes.
And it's a 250 kilowatt fast charger where you're not sharing the charging capacity with any
up to 250 kilowatts.
Okay. Up to.
Yeah.
And so they're saying that it can put 100 miles of range back in the battery in 6 minutes. And, their Twitter was saying, like, yes, it charges at 1,000 miles per hour, which seems ridiculous to me because the battery doesn't hold 1,000 miles.
If you could continuously charge it at that maximum rate, all the way until it was full, and you had that much capacity, you could put in 1,000 miles in an hour.
Well, okay, so that's nonsense on a few different levels. If you could continuously charge it at that rate and put that much energy into the battery, you'd have a fire.
Exactly, which is why they don't continuously charge it. I mean, and this applies to every charging system for every electric vehicle. As you get beyond about 75 to 80% state of charge, if you take an EV to any DC fast charging station, or even a level 2 charging station, a 240 volt charging station, and watch the power output, once you get to about 75, 80%, you will see it start to decline very dramatically as you approach full, because you don't want the battery overheating and you don't want it overcharging, both of which can cause significant damage to the internals of the battery and degrade its lifespan. And so, certainly, having, faster available charge rate is definitely going to be a lot more convenient. And I think one of the important things that Tesla is doing is something that hasn't really gotten talked a whole lot about with their existing superchargers. The current superchargers are capable of charging at 120 kilowatts, but only if there's only one car plugged into it. Each supercharger, actually has 2 cords on it. And so you can plug in 2 cars at once. But each of those current superchargers is only capable of 120 kilowatts. You plug in 2 cars, they each get 60 kilowatts, not 120.
Right. So that's, I guess, the difference with the V3 is that they have added basically 100,000 watt capacity, so a megawatt.
They put a new power control panel in for the station, and the chargers themselves have been redesigned so that essentially now you're going to get up to 500 kilowatts pumped into each one of those chargers. So you can have 250 kilowatts per vehicle that's connected to it. And that will definitely make charging hopefully more consistent for customers, because especially in recent months, as you've had more and more Model 3s out on the road, and the number of Teslas in use has climbed. Customers using superchargers have been complaining. Well, first of all, they've been complaining about long lines at the supercharger stations at a lot of the more popular stations, because they're all in use, and so you have to sit around waiting. And unlike the line at a gas station, where each car is in and out in 5 or 6 minutes, these cars may be plugged in for 30 minutes to an hour to get a full charge. So the wait times can be pretty long at a lot of supercharger stations. And then when you do get plugged in, you're not getting the full charge if everybody's using them at once. And sometimes, even if not all the chargers are in use at once, you still don't get a full charge. Henry Payne, who's the autos critic for the Detroit News, actually published a story the other day. He has a Model 3 that he bought last October. And one of the things that he talked about in there, aside from having to wait many, many weeks to get a sensor replaced on his car, was he drove across Michigan for a trip, and had to stop at a supercharger station, and there was when he got there was nobody else around, and it was not charging it anywhere near 120 kilowatts. It was more like about 40 kilowatts. And I mean, this is something that apparently happens quite regularly at supercharger stations, and it's not clear why. It may have something to do with Tesla limiting the power at some stations, if it's costing them too much in demand charges. So this is something that can happen to any charging station. I mean, there's a wide variety of things that could limit the output, but hopefully when they start rolling these out. Right now they've got one beta version 3 station in the Bay Area, and then they plan to start rolling out more later in the year as they get it verified. And then they're also doing some over-the-air software updates to all the cars to enable even all the cars that are currently in use with existing superchargers to bump that from 120 to 145 kilowatt charge rate.
Okay. So, I mean, honestly, one of the best things that Tesla has done is the supercharging stations. You know, they have this design where it's very much like a fuel station. So there's multiple chargers. They're usually in the same kind of area that a gas station is going to be. If you are trying to charge an electric car and you're not on the supercharger network, it's actually a lot harder. You know, there's a lot of chargers are listed that they're behind locked gates. You can't find them. They're at dealerships
or in parking garages where you have to go and pay to get in, and then you have to pay to use the charger. And it can be a real hassle. A lot of times to charge other vehicles, and that's absolutely one of the things that Tesla has done right. And I think some of the rest of the industry is starting to learn from that. And certainly Electrify America, VW's charging network has learned that lesson, and they're doing very similar kind of deployment to what Tesla's done.
Well, I wonder. I'm sure somebody else has wondered about this too. But there's a business alone in being that charging infrastructure provider nationwide. Very much like gas stations.
There is a potential business there. So far it has not been a profitable business for anybody because companies like EVgo and ChargePoint and Blink built up some pretty big networks of charging stations. But there haven't been nearly as many EVs sold as were projected, 7, 8, 9 years ago when they started building out these networks. And so a lot of these chargers are vastly underutilized right now. And so, all these companies have still been losing quite a bit of money. The hope is that now as we start to get a whole bunch more EVs coming to market and more affordable EVs, that these stations will start to get a lot more use, and then they can really start to expand the networks.
Yeah, well, I think too, EV customers have to become accustomed to paying for energy once again, because right now they're not really. It's not like the same as a gasoline transaction, where you pay for the gallons that you put in the tank.
Well, for DC fast charging, you usually do. A lot of the 240 volt chargers, are located at various businesses like grocery stores and things like that, where they actually pay for the charger and provide the charging for free. But a lot of the chargers you do actually have to pay for it.
All right, the
price is a lot cheaper than gasoline.
Well, there's that, and there's always anytime I talk to somebody about EVs, they always say, "Well, I can charge it for free. I'm not paying for gas." I'm like, "No, but you're paying for electricity."
Yeah, unless you've got solar panels on your house, you're still paying to charge it.
Yeah,
but but even that price is a lot lower, a lot cheaper than gas.
It is, but I think if you're going to provide charging infrastructure and set up stations with like a gas station, you're gonna tack on your cost to that, and so it's not going to be cents per kilowatt. It'll be dollars or what, however you want to do it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It'll get sorted out, but in the meantime, Tesla has to actually come up with the capital to roll it out too. So that they're piloting it. Other parts of the business don't quite look as robust.
Yes,
shall we say? And I don't want to get into it, but it seems like this may not actually happen widely depending on what goes on with Tesla. Is that accurate, or am I just being my normal cheery self?
No, it's a reasonable statement. Depending on what happens, in the next couple of months, it's entirely possible that Tesla may not be in a position to actually deploy any version 3 superchargers.
Yeah. That would be too bad, but somebody will at some point. And it's going to beat up the batteries too, right? So they may have more warranty claims.
Right, and that's what Electrify America is doing. Their stations, all of their chargers will have a minimum 150 kilowatts, and then they will have some 350 kilowatt chargers at each of their locations, and their charger design is designed to be upgradable so that over time, if demand grows for more 350 kilowatt charging, if there's more vehicles that support that, they can go back and upgrade those chargers to support 350 kilowatts.
Yeah. we're going to have, it's going to be a great time watching the grid adapt to any surging demand for electric vehicles.
Yeah.
Hey, we're just throwing around, 350 kilowatts. Okay.
Well, for overall, there's actually more than enough capacity to handle, lots and lots of EVs. The problem is, the distribution of it. How many are actually trying to charge at one time? If the charging is spread out over the course of a day, and done, at off peak times, there's more than enough capacity. It's just a matter of managing the charging.
Yeah. Well, it's a positive note for Tesla. I think that's great.
Yeah.
It makes the cars more usable, and the more that they do, the more adoption we're going to see, and the better it's going to be. So
Absolutely.
that's all I have to say about that.
All right. Well, let's call it a show with that. And this has been episode 100. We'll be back next week with episode 101.
It's going to be all three of us in the same podcast.
In fact, even in the same. Well, actually, I won't be in the same. I may be in the same time zone. Depends what day of the week we do it next week.
Okay.
Next week I will be in Eastern time. The week after, I'll be traveling.
Okay. We may actually do it all in the same room at New York if we can make that happen.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
I'm probably the eccentric to that one.
We're working on it.
So we'll see. We're working on it. Yeah.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks for listening.
Yeah, and talk to you next time. Bye.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability, ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Owning a boat comes with a number of perks, like being able to fling your favorite fishing rod around. And here's another perk. Geico's boat insurance covers your boat and your belongings. And with specialist support from agents that are as passionate about boating as you are, there's so much value that you'll want to high-five someone. But not while you're holding your fishing rod. That's a prized possession. So hold on tight with both hands and keep it covered through boat insurance. Get more with Geico.